So welcome to the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. Today we are celebrating the 90th birthday of one of the most significant cultural figures in this country, Richard Demarco. As an artist, as a cultural promoter, Richard, you have brought countless artists and performers to this country, and you've taken Scottish art and British art out into the world. Across more than 7 decades, you've been making cultural connections. So, happy birthday. And we're here joined in this conversation by one of your long-time collaborators, Arthur Watson, a past president of the Royal Scottish Academy and one of the leading voices of contemporary art. Arthur, how did you first get to know Ricky Demarco?
Well, at a distance. I was a schoolboy in Aberdeen, and I had a amazing art master at Aberdeen Grammar, a man called Charles Hemingway. I was at art school, and I would cycle over to the college. Was quite a long way from where I lived, and I would cycle over, and there were some days that I just couldn't face, you know, the endless life drawing and stuff, which I detested. I hated it. And I would stop off at Charlie's digs and just, you know, ring the bell, and he would come down. We'd go up to his rooms in this big Aberdeen West End house, and we'd have a bottle of wine and we'd talk about art. And of course I learnt far more from that than I did from the lectures at the college. And he gave me his catalogues, and the first one that he gave me was Strategy Get Art, because I think he was on Richard's mailing list as well. So he had all the catalogues of all the great shows. That's why I've got them all now.
Oh my goodness me! I didn't know that.
So I knew that, because at the time, you know, you're a student, you've maybe got 3 art books, and then you've got this amazing catalogue. So I could virtually recite that catalogue. I knew every image in it. And of course it was much later that I actually met Richard, but before I met him, when you and MacArthur and I were doing the digital archive, Ewan asked me to identify. I was identifying these photographs of Edinburgh arts at a thing in Aberdeen Art Gallery, and I said, well, there's Fred Stiven, who taught me. Next to him's Paul Niagu. That woman there is Lucy Higgins, the great traveller singer, Jeannie Robertson's daughter. And then this is that person, that's this person. I said, who's that one at the end? I said, I don't have a clue who that is. And he said, do you want to just look at it a bit more? I said, oh, it's an interesting bat. I recognised it. Oh my God. I said, that's me. It's me without a beard. You know, it was the year, I think it was the year after I left art school.
Now, Richard, you have worked with some of the great names of 20th and 21st century art. Tell us about some of those figures who've made most of an impression on you. And I have an idea of who you're going to talk about first.
Well, I think he's very much in my mind, this colossus who's alive and well. I think it's only a rumour that he's dead. His name is Joseph Beuys, and next year the whole of Germany, all the great museums, the National Museum in Berlin, the Kunstpalast in Düsseldorf, the Kunsthalle in Düsseldorf, God knows, everywhere in Berlin will be celebrating his 100th anniversary of his birth. Dear old Joseph, my God, if he'd been alive, what would he be thinking?
But you brought Joseph Beuys to Scotland.
Well, I think the most important thing is that I decided that I couldn't live my life without him. And I'd spent 2 years missing him as a physical presence in my life, because I first discovered him in his physical reality, completing his work before the opening of Documenta in 1968. And I was, in 1968, very young. I was only 38. But I remember the occasion very well because it was when I was with Eddie de Wilde, the director of the Stedelijk, and he was taking me by train from Venice to the Stedelijk because there were three of us on that journey by train. One was Edgar Negret, and he had just won the sculpture prize of the Venice Biennale. And like like Edgar Negret and Gerhard Richter, they all ended up having to stay in Edinburgh in my flat.
Yeah.
But Beuys came back, what, 6 or 7 times to...
Eight.
8 times?
Yeah.
Say something about the significance of those moments for contemporary art in Scotland.
Well, I remember thinking that there had to be something much more than the grind of meeting artists with the big event being the private view, and then if they weren't living in Scotland, that's it. You didn't see them again until the end of the show, and possibly they helped you dismantle the show. And I therefore, I found ways in which they would be involved in the gallery with lectures, talks, events, and I was told later in 1967, I think, or 1966, 67, by Roland Penrose. He said, the Demarco Gallery is the Edinburgh equivalent of the ICA in Dover Street.
Institute of Contemporary Arts.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and because there, in this house, it was exactly the same setup, more or less a Georgian style house. Yeah, and he said the ICA is giving a completely new dimension to the whole idea of what you find in London. It's not just the fact that all the other galleries are basically shops. And he said, I know that the Demarco Gallery is not a shop selling art.
And say something, Ricky, about over the years you've established particularly strong connections with Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Tell us how that came about and what the importance of that was.
I think that's a very, very important question, because the other day something happened which quite surprised me. I found myself speaking on the telephone to a journalist whose main theme is reminding Edinburgh of its history, particularly before the war, when it was a different kind of city, and during the war. And he phoned me on the 9th of June and said, tomorrow there will be a 2-page centre spread in the Edinburgh Evening News, and it's going to be about the anniversary of the 10th of June, 1940. And that was the day when all hell broke out in my world in Edinburgh because it was the day in which mob violence took over, and a mob of about 2,000 or 3,000 people more or less ran amok the whole length of Leith Walk.
Mm.
And it was when all the shops of the Italians, the Italo-Scots, were smashed. All the windows were smashed. I wasn't allowed to go to school because of the fear of mob violence. And I'll never forget that was the year where I wasn't allowed to go to the Portobello baths, which were very famous because they were beautiful baths, because I made the mistake of going into a shower after swimming, and I was attacked by a group of about half a dozen 15, 16-year-old boys. And all I can remember is the blood, the taste of blood running down my face from the blows that I suffered as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old child.
Bleak days at the beginning of the Second World War, to the period shortly afterwards, to 1947, to the establishment of the Edinburgh Festival and the creation of all those connections that the festival has meant for this country.
In 1947, you just hit it. Something happened. And my school, when I was 17, set it up that I experienced something I could not have ever anticipated in my life. The full-blown splendor of the music of Germany, performed by the great orchestra that Hitler had hated, because most of the players were Jewish, the Vienna Philharmonic. And there I got the full blast of Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, everything coming at me. And most of all, it was the music of Kathleen Ferrier. And she was singing German Lieder.
This was the first Edinburgh Festival?
First Edinburgh Festival. And I was also experiencing, after having failed my French disastrously, I think I got 4%.
Oh, you'll not be alone in that.
Yeah.
I got the O-level third attempt.
Yes, the fact is, it's only because the French teacher couldn't speak French. And I never really had French spoken. But the fact is, I was also introduced, thrown in at the deep end, to experience Molière, L'École des Femmes, performed by Louis Jouvet, the great actor, master of Molière, and his company, performing in French. It was the moment when I knew that Edinburgh, for some ridiculous reason, against all the odds, should become the one city in all of Europe that was about the rebirth of the human spirit. And the Lord Provost then was a marvelous man called Sir John Falconer. And he said, this is about the glorification of the human spirit. It's in no way a commercial venture. And so therefore, I don't know, I just felt that I could live in Scotland if I could hang on to the 3 weeks when Edinburgh forgot its, sorry, I must say this, its Hudden Presbyterian stone-faced attitude towards all the arts. And so, in these days, by the way, there was no gallery of modern art.
But that runs counter to what you said during one of those conversations when there was the big show at the National Portrait Gallery,
That's right.
the archive, And I wrote it down in the notebook because I was on the platform with you, and said, I have failed to live in Scotland all my life. I live in Europe. And I thought that was absolutely spot on.
Throughout the Cold War, you felt it was really important, more important than ever, to establish those connections across into countries like Poland, into what was then Czechoslovakia and so on. Tell us some more about that.
Well, it goes right back again to the war, because you know I represent a community of human beings that are now 95% dead. I'm a survivor, and I think the archive is not my archive. It's a kind of it's an evidence that I had to do my very best to bring Europe into the world of Scotland, because I never trusted Edinburgh. I always thought how unfortunate it is that Edinburgh is the capital, but the people of Aberdeen don't benefit. The people of Dundee don't benefit. The people of Perth don't benefit. It's stuck within the boundaries, the city boundaries. And I remember thinking, in these early days, I had a feeling that the support that I needed would come from the world of General Matchett.
Arthur, you've followed Ricky's connections in and out of Europe, and you've not only collaborated with him, but you've also been involved with some of these artists. Could you say something about what the significance of Cantor or Niagu or Beuys is for contemporary art in Scotland?
I knew Paul Niagu reasonably well through Richard. We were in exhibitions together in various parts of Europe, and probably the one that we really got to know each other, and then he came and showed in the gallery I was running in Aberdeen as well, was in Sarajevo. And this was one of a series of initiatives between Richard and the then Scottish Sculpture Trust, Barbara Grigger.
Ah, yes.
And they had some money, but they also had a wide understanding of what sculpture was, which was, you know, quite extended, and didn't, although they were the Scottish Sculpture Trust, they didn't see themselves as being confined by Scotland. Because also Richard's always had a fairly elastic notion of who's Scottish. I mean, I've been in several shows with a Scot called Joseph Beuys, one of them in Ireland, and in the case of the Sarajevo one, which was new contemporary art from Scotland, in this big space right in the centre of Sarajevo, adjacent to what became Sniper's Alley, Collegium Artisticum, which was twice the size of the fruit market, you know, big spaces. But of course, to transport big sculptural installations from Scotland to there, just that would break the budget. So Richard decided that it was far cheaper to transport the sculptors and to make the work in the gallery, which is what we did. So over a space of how many? I think it was 4 days.
4 days.
So I was working next to Paul in this, and he'd come over with a little bundle of these bits of iron, you know, with a spike at each end in 2 right angles, called dogs. And he had one tool, which was an axe with a hammer head, and he made the work with that. And he'd asked for some, you know, like railway sleepers to be there.
That's right, yeah, huge.
And he just knocked them together with these dogs, you know, and you know, so we were working. George Wiley was working beside us. Marilyn Smith,
yes,
who had asked for a kind of wrecked car, and she had a slide projector, and that's projecting out from the car into the walls of the gallery. Ainsley Ewell did this big installation of these beautiful drawings, and he had these iron, you know, they were like eagles' heads made out of iron, you know, welded bits of iron. And he had these installed in the gallery, and then he opened this folio and these beautiful drawings, and he took the drawings, whoop, beak through the drawing. You know, so all the drawings were impaled on these structures, and it was just
fantastic.
I mean, it was an amazing thing.
Well, can I just say, the happy moments in my life were when I translated, I transformed my work from being a so-called gallery director, a seller of artworks. I hated the business of having to sell an artwork. I even questioned the whole idea. If you want to buy one work, why don't you buy the whole exhibition? I remember saying that to more than one person, scandalizing them. And we can arrange a price. You should buy the whole exhibition. Okay. Because I didn't like the idea of exhibitions being broken up. Yeah. Because I thought that an artist was at his best, or her best, when they were putting together the whole thing.
They make sense of each other. The individual works make sense of each other.
And then I was trying to get over to your predecessors the fact that they shouldn't just buy an example of a work of an artist, but they should have a means. I mean, am I speaking to the First Minister here and the Scottish parliamentarians? Am I speaking to them? Yes, I'm speaking to them and saying, what are you doing to honour the genius of all the artists who've worked in Scotland and been inspired by Scotland? What have you done to make sure that a genius that is now being celebrated in the Tate, Paul Nagu, they're putting on a big thing. You're not doing it here. Why? Because you don't realise there's a room, for example. Remember, I took you there, the Romanian Room, and it's called Paul Nagu and Friends. And it's all about his friends that he had.
And that amazing show in Bucharest that we were at.
Oh my God, yes.
Paul, where the film from your part of the archive was central to the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the archive for a moment, because Ricky, you have over the years collected or accumulated an extraordinary record of your journey through these decades. Can you capture something of the essence of the Demarco archive?
Well, I don't think you can separate, for example, any artwork that may be associated with the art of Arthur. You can't. It's so positioned in the archive that immediately you are thinking of Paul Nagu, and you're thinking of Ainsley Yo, and you're thinking of Ian Hampton Finlay, the first show he had, where he was asked to really go beyond the concept of a two-dimensional image. As soon as you put on one artist, I mean, that's why I know that my archive is not an archive. It's a Gesamtkunstwerk.
A total work of art.
That's right. In a way, the Demarco archive is an extension of it's an extension of the Royal Scottish Academy archive, because practically every single artist throughout my lifetime that I cared about is represented.
Eventually was represented by the Royal Scottish, not when it started.
Yes, but they were when they were red hot.
Yeah.
When no one wanted to touch them with a barge pole. So from 1967, through Lord Harwood and his assistant Alexander Shabalov, Russian genius, they wanted me to bring in the energy of living artists, because in one of the conversations I had with Lord Harwood, I said, it's all very well. I'm totally, completely in love with everything the festival is. He said, okay, we can help, and therefore I think it's a great idea. But unfortunately, he got himself in trouble through John Calder and Jim Haynes because of the scandal of the drama conference and the nude figure appearing at the Sanctum Sanctorum, the sacred place of Edinburgh university's graduation hall. But the fact is, he had to leave, but he insisted that Peter Diamond, who succeeded him, accepted the idea, which was the great moment when I'm sitting in Peter's office and he says, he was smoking the last stub. He was always smoking the cigarette right down. He said, I'll never forget how he spoke. Ricky, you can do it. I said, oh God, what does it mean? He said, yeah, we should have living artists. And so therefore, he then said, you can do it. You can be the official director, but you will pay for it. Not only was I not going to be paid, I was going to have to fund it. So guess how much money I had to raise? £7 million. From 1967 to 1991, I was in command, and all these shows were paid for by the governments of Bosnia, Herzegovina, Poland, Romania, Germany, France, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I got the money from everywhere because the Edinburgh Festival was on the level, in my mind, with Documenta.
It was the key international gathering. So you'd get an audience here that you couldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah,
that was the key to it.
And I was saying, I mean, we're in the English-speaking world where, Documenta's in Germany, and not many people speak German. Venice Biennale is in Venice, but here we've got the chance to bring the greatest artists in the world with shows of great historic importance, as important as anything that Venice Biennale can put on. But one of the things that's worrying me is that the Edinburgh Festival is now not what it was. Its main aim is to raise money for the city through stand-up comics and the like. And the Fringe is now dominant, and they have not acknowledged the moments of history when people like Cantor made their international reputation here, because it was when they came here, it was when Beuys came here to the English-speaking part of the world that their whole trajectory of their career took off.
Ricky, tell us something more about how you've spoken in your own words about going in the wrong direction towards Eastern Europe.
Oh yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I remember my board saying, I don't know why you're wasting your time going to Eastern Europe, crossing the Iron Curtain. You should be going to where the art world is, in all the art fairs, to Basel, to New York, to California. I actually found myself going to the art fair in Los Angeles and finding it disgusting, and finding that the future for the arts was not in the whole thing becoming an international shop front. The answer was in the pure intentions of artists like Cantor and Staszewski, the artists in Eastern Europe who were making art for a different reason. And therefore, for most of my life, I was dealing with artists who were making art for the right reason. They knew it could never be translated into money. And the only collections that I could take seriously was, for example, the Great Collection, which is perhaps the greatest collection in the world, is the collection of the Museum Sztuki in Łódź. Because it was created by Malevich, Staszewski, Picasso. It wasn't a bunch of money people, it was artists coming together saying we need. And I remember thinking, my relationship with that museum is central to my whole philosophy.
And of course, because the photographs are really the key the key thing, because the story is told through the photographs, and now the emerging bits of film, you know, that actually show the key artists that you work with, because all of them, you know, the big three, if you like, Beuys, Cantor and Nuagu, they're all really important films. You know, so I think these satellite things are really quite
So shall we make an appointment now for 10 years' time? The three of us will get together in this new setting in North Edinburgh and look back on what's been achieved over the past 10 years. Let's make that.
That's a date.
Well,
Richard, happy birthday.